What's up, my loves? My name is Paige, this is Paige with Paige, and today this is the start of a new reading vlog project. I don't know what the fuck this is yet. Hello, so welcome to this thing. You will know what this is titled. I currently do not. It is currently the 19th of January, and how this project came into fruition is that Mel from a book fiend named Mel and myself were talking about the fact that we love retellings, and we thought we have a lot of mutual interests and a lot of our overlap in the stories. However, we wanted to look at it in a bit more of a critical perspective, which is not something that I do often. If you're new here, my reading is genuinely based on whatever the fuck I'm feeling, and if a book is problematic and I can see those problematic elements, then I call it out. Usually it doesn't hamper too much on my enjoyment, but I do have some exceptional standouts like Men Are From Mars, Mary Poppins, and 50 Shades. They're just ones that I really don't like and didn't vibe with, but for the most part my reading is at least 3.5, 4 or 5 stars because I go into things wanting to enjoy it, and if I enjoy the reading experience, it's done what it's wanted to do. So I'm not a critical reader. I don't go into books wanting to do an analytical or critical perspective of it because I've done that for so long in my life, being in uni and in high school. I don't think I ever did it well. Take it that way you will, considering it was in an academic setting, and so when they're assessing you how to swim but you're a monkey, things get a little mixed. So I thought not having those boundaries and those limitations would be a really good experience to go through, and want to focus currently on retellings, restructurings of the Iliad. Now, Mel and I will be rereading the Iliad, so then we have a good foundation. However, because this book worked into my TBR for January, we've started it. And I'm now deeply regretting that choice, and I feel like I should have reread the Iliad first, but here we are. So we're just gonna roll with it. It's fine. I didn't say it was gonna be a good critical analysis. None of these vlog clips are gonna be scripted. They're not really going to be in depth. Like, I'm not planning on doing this as a video essay. I'm sort of doing this to get into the feel of being able to break down my thoughts into a more coherent matter and see if I can draw any parallels or themes or topics that I'm interested in and always have been, especially when it comes to feminist retellings, which we'll touch on that. Not in this vlog clip, but in the future. It just sort of figured this is an experiment for my reading to, even though I'm reading things quickly, sit with it and think on it, which is not something I usually do. Normally I just read it and then I've read it, and however I enjoyed that experience was how I enjoyed that experience. I don't think this is going to drastically change my reading. I think it will take me longer to get through books because I will need to stop and think. But aside from that, I'm just curious. So this might be like a failed attempt in doing a critical analysis. It might just be a vlog of reading Greek retellings based around the Iliad. That's fine by me. We're just here to see how the fuck this goes. So firstly, the book that we have started reading first is 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, and Mel has added me in a group chat with their friend Max, and Max is a classicist, and so their conversation is so fucking interesting, and I'm like, holy shit. So they've been discussing a lot of the foundational thinking into feminist retellings, which is what this has been marketed at. And I think, just going off the synopsis, that is a mismarketing, because literally the last paragraph says, powerfully told from an all-female perspective, in 1,000 Ships, Natalie Haynes puts the women, girls and goddesses at the center of the story. So it's not claiming to be a feminist take, which a lot of discourse around this book has claimed it to be the woman's story, so it must be a feminist retelling. We'll see. We'll get into that. Honestly, having discussions with Ash, especially about Ariadne, where we had very different reading experiences, has really drawn into light my idea of feminism. And I'm definitely in the party that leans more towards equality as feminism rather than extreme man-hating feminism. Like, that's not my fucking vibe. Definitely more in the equalist perspective, but I do also understand that due to the barriers, it's not as simple as being like, yeah, men and women are equal, so everything's amazing in the world, because that's not how it's going. So I've read 25% of this, which is 86 pages out of 345. I am halfway through Retellings and Chrysalis' main chapter. So I still have a little bit of a way to go to finalize off this chapter, but I wanted to come in and start this vlog. I did actually mean to start it 2 days ago when I first started reading this, but I went back and reread a significant portion of it tonight because I fell asleep on the couch while I was listening to it the first time. So, not that it's boring, that's just a me thing. I will come home, sit on the couch and then fall asleep, even if I'm trying to listen to an audiobook. It's fun! Oh no, I didn't have a train of thought to begin with. For this, I find the snippets of the female's perspective really interesting, and the reason that I feel like I need to reread the Iliad first is because I think it's following the narrative structure. So these women peaked up in these places, but I'm not remembering enough of the Iliad to be like, yeah, this was this person that was briefly mentioned here. This is this section. Obviously some bigger names I definitely do remember, and I have read Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker before, which also focuses on Briseis's story. I will also mispronounce every fucking name, even though I'm listening to the audiobook, they don't stick in my head. So I apologize. I know who I'm talking about. Hope the fuck you pick up on who I'm talking about. I'm finding it interesting having a look at how the women were experiencing what was going on and being able to sort of expand on their experience. Like, yes, the Iliad did explore a variety of themes and the female voice wasn't overly prominent, but women were still there. So getting to see that expansion is very interesting. And I think chapter 5 threw me off a little bit because it was, the main muse was talking about the poet. And I was like, wait, what the fuck? And so I messaged Mel and I was like, what is going on? And what this is doing is restructuring the Iliad by highlighting those women's voices. And the muse is encouraging Homer to look at the Iliad and the story that he wants to write from another perspective. I found that really interesting. So now that I've got that in my wheelhouse, I'm like more prepared to go into this, and that's also why I want to read the Iliad, so then I could see those parallels as it's going. So I might come back when we're rereading the Iliad and going, oh yes. In terms of feminism, which I think is going to be a recurrent theme throughout this entire project, it's just the women's experiences. So for me, that's exactly what I want. It is just seeing how these women lived and the consequences of others' actions on their lives and being able to hear their voice during this time. So I like it. It's accomplishing what I want. Again, it is not going men are fucking shit for making this happen. It is just going, this is the experience that is currently being undertaken for these women. And I love that shit. That is what I love in retellings or restructurings, to hear the women's voice. It's just to add a little bit more depth. That's all I've got for the moment. I am definitely interested to see how particular themes of slavery are addressed as prizes and knowing that element to it. So seeing that perspective will be interesting. And I really like that it's an all-woman cast, because my assumption with this is that Natalie Haynes would assume that you know the main story, or at least know enough of it to be able to follow along without getting lost because you know the background. And so this is just an add to it. So I'm curious to see if that is how it continues along those lines, or if it goes more into the like feminist saving the day, doing all that shit. So I don't know. I have no idea. But we're gonna find out, and I think I'm gonna check in every quarter for these books just so I can get through a decent amount, have some thoughts. If anything actually flags from day dot, then I will flag it, but otherwise I can sort of just keep it relatively structured and not too long while I ramble off about not knowing shit. I hope this is interesting, and I'm very curious to see where it ends up, definitely throughout this vlog. And as I read more books and more the Iliad and then other books on top of that, I will definitely get more into a flow, so I hope you stick around for that. And yeah, I'll see you at the 50% for 1,000 ships. Hello. So I know that I said I would check in at 50%, but I have had some thoughts and I've been reading today. So I'm now at 37% through 1,000 ships. The discussion's super interesting because I'm not looking at this from a necessarily in-depth critical perspective. That was never my goal. My goal was to read it and to think. But that doesn't mean I'm going to dissect every part of it and really like crunch into the meat. Just take my time to talk through and think through my thoughts and however that came to be. With chapter 12, there was one paragraph that was discussed with Mel and Max and myself, and Max described it as there being two ways to read the passage. One is more author self-insert on the fact that this is how Homer should have portrayed women, or the other is the fact that the way that women are portrayed in the Iliad is thanks to the muses' input. Looking at that two sides. For me, I can fully appreciate falling either way, but the whole paragraph or the whole passage really just resonated with me, and I took through it with Ash as well. But there was one that was, she isn't a footnote, she's a person. And that really, if it's a dig at the way that women were written in classical texts, not accurate. There's been a lot of discussion that, you know, whilst it's not like a feminist woke text, women are still present. And Ash and I discuss a lot that the fact that women are not going to be the main focus of this man's life if he is fighting a war and he's not really thinking about other people, he's focusing on the key players. And that's fine.
It's like you look at modern day letters written home to during World War I and World War II. They didn't talk about what was going on at home. They talked about their day-to-day life in the trenches. They talked about what wasn't classified and they could reveal to their families to let them know how they were.
Yeah. The women also would have responded with the day-to-day running of the house in the generalist stretches of the term. But when you're comparing that to the horrors of war...
When you're at war...
That's not a priority.
You're trying to tell the world how bad this is. And it's hard to convey that from someone who's not there.
Yes. And not to say that there aren't women present at wartime.
But especially in ancient Greek times, the number of women at war were just minuscule at best. Not
many. In that aspect, it's like, well, yeah, it makes sense that they aren't an overly active presence. But it doesn't mean that they, like Homer or whoever composes them, that they shouldn't not include women's experiences, because
exactly
it is, then, as Natalie talks about a lot, especially in this, heroes don't become heroes without carnage, and carnage has both causes and consequences, and those don't begin and end on a battlefield.
Well, when you read that passage out to me immediately was the fact that it hurt him too much to talk about one of the women. And my reply was, men would rather rewrite women out of history than go to therapy.
Which, not wrong.
And he's that scarred by the situation that he won't mention her anymore.
Yeah.
Because every time he would bring her up, it would break his heart again. And that's
a matter of self-preservation as well.
It's a matter, he doesn't want to break again. Because he's already broken once and it's obviously done a number on him.
Yeah. I can appreciate, because I wasn't reading that from that perspective.
Yeah.
Like, I could feel that it was the pain, but for me, I suppose this is my own lens coming into it. I thought it was also like a little bit of laziness.
A little bit of a cop-out, yeah.
Yeah.
I completely understand that too.
But acknowledging that, you know, that's my own preconceived notions and that's not always...
Everyone deals with emotions differently.
Yeah, 100%.
Some people put all of their emotions on the page. Others rewrite their emotions out of history.
Yeah. Yes. But with the writing about her, Natalie continues with, he would rather her story have been snuffed out like a spark failing to catch on damp kindling. It does hurt, I whisper. It should hurt. She isn't a footnote, she's a person. And she and all the other Trojan women should be memorialized as much as any other person. Their Greek counterparts too. Which, that hit with me.
Yeah.
Because as a woman, and as someone that has felt like a footnote in life... I want that for them.
Yeah.
And so I feel like she very articulately, whether it be a dig or not, for me, it hit the right notes in what I want to hear to know that my voice would be remembered.
Yeah.
Mine's more like that immediate emotional first reaction rather than sitting with it and going, oh yeah, like, is she having a dig at the portrayal of women in history? Like, oh!
Yeah.
Because I'm too caught up in the feelings of, fuck yes, like, please give me their voices, make them not be footnotes, make sure that we're not going to be dampened.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's where my initial response to that passage was, and I found it very impactful and inspiring. And then Mel and I were talking because that wasn't her initial reaction, because she was looking at it on not sure how, like, hers was more a little bit of confliction, because is it saying the two perspectives?
Yeah.
She wasn't sure where she felt with it. And then this is also hammered home for me that, and continuing to read on a little bit as well, the fact that this is literally just retelling the Iliad, but my favorite word of today, extrapolating the women's voices and talking through literally their point of view of what's unfolding from the Iliad. Whether this becomes further commentary, and I'll discuss with Mel and Max, of whether this is becoming a commentary of the way that it should have been written, is I think the point of contention currently. But for me, if I just take it as Natalie has decided to rewrite the Iliad, take the voices of the women and tell it from their side, that's amazing. But with having the muse's input and her being like, this is the way it should have been done, is where the confliction lies in our discussion. So I'm curious, I'm very curious to see how it continues to go. I'm up to page 128. So we're getting there. I'm nearly halfway. If I have any more thoughts, I will check in. Since I am quite close to the halfway mark, I might not have anything more to say, so I'll skip over that and just continue till I have some more thoughts. Or if Ash has anything he wants to comment, or if we have an interesting discussion on the chat, I will come on and talk through my brain. That's really a long, convoluted way of saying that if this is done in a way that I am hoping it is, then I'm really enjoying this. But if it's going to be bashing on Homer for not including women more, then that makes me sad. Critical thinking 101. This gives me sad. Otherwise I'd be glad. I'm going to bed now. Night. Good morning. So I'm now at 50% of the way through 1,000 ships, and I don't really have too many more thoughts. Most recent Calliope section lent a little bit more into the negative side of things, which wasn't great. And I did notice the same that Mel had commented, that Penelope's section really did focus more on just retelling Odysseus's story rather than looking at Penelope. Just interesting takes, but I'm gonna get up. I've been sitting in bed watching YouTube and reading all morning, which has been delightful. I'm gonna get up and film another bit of my TBR, which will be going up on Friday, and I'm so excited. Not that it will be well past by the time this video goes up. We also had a discussion more on Mel was looking at if she's trying to make it more accessible and broad and introducing the female voice, even though it was already there. For those that are unaware of it, she's trying to cover too much ground in a very short period of time. So there are so many different perspectives happening, and it's like, yes, this person was touched on briefly, so I'm going to expand on their story. But in a way, it's like she's trying to make the Iliad more accessible, but at the same time, without being familiar with the story. But you need to be familiar with the story to understand the large range of voices that have been chosen. It's interesting. Still thinking on that one, so I will continue thinking, and then hopefully have some more thoughts to talk to you about later. Basically, I'm still like, I'm really enjoying it, and I find each of the perspectives interesting because I know their story, or their involvement in singular parts of the story. So if her goal is to make this more accessible for a wider audience without them having read the Iliad, I don't think it's overly successful in that. So yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy to think on. So I will go ruminate my ship planned and hopefully continue reading more of this later today. So I would like to make it to the end, if not 75% of the way. I'm gonna go do some things because I'm really excited about it. Okay, bye! So I'm now 75% of the way through, and I don't really have too many more thoughts currently. It did get a little bit more of the male focus, which I thought was an interesting decision. But aside from that, it's the story itself, and I find it easier to read than the Iliad, that's for sure. But I think that it definitely took on more of a tone focusing towards men rather than focusing on the female voice, and I don't know if that's just because there was a section of narrative that needs to be told that didn't really have a female voice, so I'm not sure. I'm still enjoying it. I'm hopefully going to finish this off tonight, and then we'll see when and what is the next thing. It will probably be the Iliad in April, so I will chat to you later. Hello my loves, so I finished 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, and I'm giving it a 4 stars. I enjoyed hearing a different perspective and expanding on it. Mel has not finished as of yet, and it's Monday the 23rd of January, which is fine. I'm gonna wait to make further comments, and like if we have more of a discussion, there might not be anything that I want to add. Max did say that sometimes in an effort to include any women, modern women overlook the women who were already there and erase or overlook the traces of women that we do have in the past and make it ahistorical and like, look at me, I'm doing a good thing by adding women in, but I'm not doing it in a way that's authentic, and or I'm just writing over the voice that does exist. So I fully understand that and can see that Natalie did change things. I do like the author's note where she acknowledges that like some of it was literary, some of it was archaeological, some chapters were entirely of her own invention, and some were borrowed from the source material. It was Euripides' Trojan Women, Homer's Odyssey, and Virgil's Aeneid. So they mentioned that, you know, their goal is not to be historically accurate. I found it interesting, I found it fun. I like hearing the myth told from a different perspective, and if we're looking at retelling the Odyssey in correct detail and giving voice, that's not this book. But if you want to sort of have fun just listening to more female experiences in Greek mythology, then this might be for you, because I don't remember the Iliad or the other source material that she's referenced. I don't think I've read any of the other source material that she referenced. I can't really get a feel for how the women were portrayed, so I'm just going off Max and Mel saying that they were there. Whilst it wasn't like gun-ho feminism, it wasn't bad representation either of women in the originals. I can appreciate the purpose that they wanted the book to be. Natalie doesn't quite live up to it, but for me, as an entertaining female voiced text, I liked it. So yeah, I'm definitely keen to reread the Iliad and see where we go and get to know more stories. So hopefully I'll be able to provide more of an analysis later on. Again, none of these videos are structured or scripted, so it is what it is. And I will see you in whatever comes next. Hello my loves, so welcome to the second month of this project with Mel, and we are reading Elektra by Jennifer Saint. So I've started this today and I am going to be sort of speed reading through it. With saying that, I'm already 25% of the way through. I really am keen to have a discussion with Mel and see how she's sort of vibing with it. I definitely already am enjoying having just 3 main perspectives, and that being the story that we're following, and it's from the women's perspective once again. That is a reoccurring trend with these reimaginings and retellings. It's taking the women and actually have them speak in a more in-depth way. And what happened with 1,000 Ships was more that the voices got lost. So I think Jennifer Saint made a good choice in just following 3 crucial characters, 2 of which are in one location and then another in a different location, so we can sort of see the dichotomy that is occurring in the different locations at the start of the Trojan War, which essentially is it starts a lot earlier. It is shown with Helen picking her suitor and her sister asking, why did you pick that guy? So that was pretty interesting. And yeah, I don't really have too many thoughts currently on the actual story. I am definitely in a place where it feels awfully familiar, so my level of engagement is probably not as active as it was with 1,000 Ships. I also do know that I like Jennifer Saint's writing because I really enjoyed her writing in Ariadne. And I just keep thinking I want Ash to be reading this with me so then I can get his perspective, because he had a different viewpoint on the ending of Ariadne, and obviously we're still in the very early stages of this, but I'm interested to see what he thinks and how he feels that it goes. We've started, we're making progress, which is great because it is the 26th of February, so I have 2 days to finish this. I think I should be able to. I got a few things on tomorrow, but mostly if I can get my filming and editing done, it should be a pretty cruisy night, so then hopefully I can dive back in and just get it all sorted. I've messaged Mel that I have started it, so hopefully there will be some discussion with her soon to be able to sort of raise thoughts with her. I'm also reading it on my tablet because it's just bigger and my eyes like it much better. I do have to admit it was interesting in the first section when talking about Zeus and it being like daughter of Zeus. That's what the stories said of Helen. It was well known that Zeus could adopt many forms, and on this particular occasion he appeared to our mother feathered and snowy white, gliding down the river towards her with unmistakable purpose. To be blessed by Zeus in such a way was a thing of glory. That's what everyone said. If later our mother had been deemed lovely enough by the ruler of the gods himself, it was a great honor to our family. It was not a disgrace to our father to raise the product of such a union himself. And then there is continuation of discussion with Helen and Clytemnestra. Apologies, I have been listening to the audiobook, but the name has yet to stick. Saying, well, you know, I'm so beautiful, I'm probably, you know, going to be chosen by the gods, and Menelaus seems like a bit of a pushover, so he's not going to get uppity if I get pregnant to a god. I was just like, interesting. I also find I don't know enough about the histories to know if it was common opinion that it would be a glorious event that Zeus, you know, raped a woman. I don't know the histories that much, so I'm curious to raise that with Max and just be like, hello, please provide. And then you have the juxtaposition of Cassandra and Apollo and that whole situation. So it's not like Jennifer Saint is sugarcoating the rape, because they definitely go in to discussion about Cassandra and the fact that they were like no, and the consequences of saying no to a god. I don't know, it's just interesting that that was how we chose to open it, when I feel like there could have been some commentary there, but also it makes sense in the way that it was done. So I'm curious to have that discussion with Max and Mel to see what they think on that one as well. But that's everything, so I'm gonna sign off for the night and hopefully check in with you tomorrow with more of an update. Fingers crossed, at least the 75% would be great. Hello, so I'm now at the 50% mark of Elektra, and I am, fingers crossed, hopefully going to finish it tonight. I don't know if that will actually happen or not, but we're going to try, at least get to the 75% mark. I am definitely enjoying the focused narrative of this rather than the snippets that Natalie Haynes chose to do. So this is just following 3 main perspectives, and that is making it a lot easier to keep up with where everything is. I think Jennifer Saint just sets out to tell a narrative of the time and the women's perspectives and sort of just give them a little bit more of a voice, but not in the way that Natalie Haynes was like, here, look at every woman that was like present in the Trojan War. So it's definitely a difference in style choice. Funnily enough, I actually, whilst I like following the 3 characters, I'm bored. And I think that's more of a me reading the same sort of story back to back, because it is just retelling something I've read last month, and admittedly it does it in more detail, so it's a lot more focused and a lot more central with these women, which is enjoyable, but I find it very easy to just zone out. So haven't heard from Mel. I have told her that I was at the 25% mark, and I'll message her now saying that I'm at 50%, so she knows that she can splurge away with her thoughts. I will chat with you later. Hello, so just jumping in because I have hit the 75% mark of Elektra and definitely found this half way more captivating than the first half. I think it just hit a point where it was so focusing on the women's perspectives in Elektra that it was something different that hadn't been discussed before, and it sort of just shook things in a way that made it a little bit more captivating and engaging for someone who was originally thinking that they'd already read it before and recently. More a me error than a book error, but I'm still really enjoying it. It's so interesting. I really like how Jennifer Saint sort of takes the voices and amplifies them and gives us their story, but explores in depth their feelings and emotions at this time, their motivations. I'm keen for Ash to pick this up because we did have such differing opinions. Well, not like massively, just the ending he found very man-bashy, but for me, I didn't notice it in Ariadne. But with this, Agamemnon is just a dick, so it's not really like changing anything of the narrative. But I've still got 25% to go, so hopefully no one's going to go on a rampaging psycho manhunt, and it can just keep its strength in just amplifying women's voices. I'm gonna bounce off, but I will check in with you tomorrow when I finish it. Bye! Hello my loves. So I have finished Elektra by Jennifer Saint and I'm giving it a 4 stars. Mel and I have not yet had a discussion, so I will come back and talk about my thoughts at another point, but it is currently nearly 11:30 at night, so I need to go to bed because I have work tomorrow. But I just wanted to come on and say that I really enjoyed seeing the different women's perspectives, and I really appreciated it having that narrower focus. I feel like if we're comparing the two, Natalie Haynes did a broad introduction but still needed to have some basic knowledge. So don't know if it would be the perfect place for people to start with if they are trying to get into Greek mythology, because it is so surface level. It doesn't really deep dive. Whereas Jennifer Saint takes it and presents it in a narrative format that was similar to what Natalie was doing, but just by focusing on the 3 women, managed to look into the repercussions from their perspective in a lot more detail and just made it overall flow a bit clearer. I did give them both the same rating because I enjoyed both and I think they both offer something different, but when comparing them it's definitely a noticeable difference to what is presented in one to the other, and I just feel overall that I think I'm really excited to try Natalie Haynes' works for her focused individuals, so rather than looking at the women as a whole, more narrowing it into like Medusa and just having that focus. I'm very keen to continue on with our little project. We are taking a break in March, so I will come in for the discussion and any key points that have been raised. I don't really have many thoughts at the moment because I was speed reading it, so I didn't really get to nitty gritty it, but I can definitely already feel contrast between the two, so I'm really excited for our discussion. And yeah, next I will be talking about the Iliad by Homer, so yay! I'm so excited, Mel. This is great. I will come back and chat through that when we're up to it, but yeah, I will check in with you once we've had that. Bye! Hello! Welcome to the next section of this vlog where I will be reading the Iliad by Homer. Not gonna lie, my heels were dug in pretty hard on not feeling the vibes for this and not wanting to read it, but I found an audiobook narrated by Dan Stevens, and so his voice massages my ovaries, so I'm just gonna roll with that. And then I have the Cliff Notes downloaded on the Libby app, so once I read a book I'm gonna then look up the summary and just go over that. It's interesting because looking at this whole project, it's been designed to look at feminist voice and female voice and the retellings of the original, not to provide a voice that's not there, but to amplify it and just provide a different perspective, because why not? It's not something talked about in the original. So when I'm reading the original, I'm like, yes. Athena and the goddesses are included, and they are a female voice, so they're represented in that capacity. When thinking about Briseis and having the retellings of what she was going through at the time, she is just a name. Her person is not a matter to the story, but just the fact that she's a prize of war and 2 men are squabbling over her and acting like right douche canoes. So Homer's, I believe, intention was to talk about not the trivialness of man, but along the lines of, hey, pride and honor can make us do stupid things. and then having the gods interfere and have parallels demonstrates the relationships between god and man and the different interactions between the female gods and the male gods, and then their interactions with man is very interesting. I'm trying to think back to the other books and see if there was more interaction with the gods, talking with Hera and Athena or praying to them. Obviously with Cassandra and Apollo there was definitely actions, but I don't know that the gods take as active a role in retellings, or the retellings that we've read so far. I think there is a lot of discussion to be had. I just don't know how to align it to this vlog, which is essentially the feminist retellings. And currently, aside from the female gods, there is not a female. We'll see how I go tomorrow. Hello, so I just finished book 2 of the Iliad and don't really have more thoughts on what occurred in the book in terms of feminist representation or representation of women as a whole. I did also want to mention that the power of women and mothers was also prevalent with Achilles' mother speaking to Zeus and actually having sway, considering Zeus is usually a dick. So the fact that she was able to provide more support for Achilles through talking with Zeus. It's interesting that Zeus doesn't think of the consequences of his actions in terms of the impact on mortals' lives, but yeah, book 2 is mostly focusing on honor and pride, and again there was the gods, but it was mostly focusing on Agamemnon and his inability to act as a leader, the fact that it was 2 other individuals that curb the desire in the men to leave, because Agamemnon was like, yeah, okay, like, off you go. And they were like, what the fuck, okay, bye bitch. And then Odysseus and Nestor were like, hold on, like, let's have some pride and some honor, shall we? It was an interesting section. He also did then catalogue a whole lot of different people, which I feel is important to historians, but they just washed right over my brain. I feel like there was reference to others that did get referenced in 1,000 Ships and Elektra, but mostly in one ear, out the other. Because I was as sick as a dog, so I'm just going through and working my way book by book. So yeah, we'll see where I get up to today. I would like to make some decent progress, but because I'm stopping and starting, I don't know how that'll go. I'm also then reading the cliff notes, which are cementing what is happening. But again, I don't really know the impact on women and looking at it from a female voice, because there isn't any, because the whole premise of it is an argument between men. So curious to see where it all shapes up to, but I'm gonna keep listening and drink my tea. I also do need to have some lunch soon. Hello again. So I've just gotten up to an hour and a half ago, finished chapter 7, and now I'm just procrastinating because I have just dug my heels in again. Chapter 6 was really lovely in seeing Hector as a father figure and like a community man, and the experiences of the women while they're waiting for their husbands, and like why in book 2 the army was so excited to get back on their boats when Agamemnon said that they could go home. And so it's sort of providing that different context to the environment, and it not just being solely based on the battles. Like, predominant, this is a war story, it's telling of the Trojan War, so it's going to be focused on the battles, and Homer's using the battle scenes as points of human traits, and then having the gods play into those emotional areas and looking at how they impact on humans' plight. There was a lot going on to it, but I really liked seeing that there were backstories to each individual, that just because this is the telling of the Trojan War doesn't mean that these individuals aren't worth something outside the context of war, which I think was one of the points that Homer was trying to make, because you're pitting Achilles against Hector, and Hector isn't a family man, he is just this icon of war and being an amazing warrior, and then you have Hector who is a family man, and you get to see that contrast, and that was interesting. I'm gonna keep going for as long as I can, but I am feeling like absolute trash, and it is 4 o'clock, so we'll see where I get up to tonight, but hopefully I can make some more progress, and I will chat with you when I've read some more. I also did fall asleep before a section. Hello my loves, sorry, just jumping on because I have finished the Iliad and I didn't end up doing check-ins. I sort of just wanted to get through it. It's definitely interesting having approached it from going, I'm gonna look at the women in this, because the women that are prevalent are the gods. It's a war story, like there aren't that many female representation. There is times where, you know, we get to see their families and we're knowing about Briseis, and so there are other females, but it's not the prominent point of the story, because the prominent point of the story is the folly of man. So I was reading it and I was like, there really isn't too much that I want to comment on in terms of that. So what rereading it has done for me is actually solidified the fact that I like that there are retellings that take the female voice. Yes, sometimes they're not done fantastically, or they overshoot their goal, they make it more like there's too many perspectives with the case for Natalie Haynes, but it was still an enjoyable retelling of the story, and it provides another layer of depth. Whilst the Iliad is great to dissect when looking at the relationship between gods and humans, the follies of man and the emotions that you lose yourself into as a human and then cause catastrophe. There's a lot of discussion for those elements, but unless you're a historian, you're not going to get the contextual history to the Iliad. You're just gonna get the story. I like that so many different people have taken on giving the different characters that are mentioned a voice and putting it into the wider context, essentially, just because it's something different. I can understand that it's really hard to retell a story that doesn't give you much of a base. If you do your research well, there is evidence of what it would have been like as a woman, and you can run with that. I do think that the narrative strategy that Natalie Haynes chose with making it more poetic and having the muse influencing Homer was fun rereading it, because I'm like, oh yeah, like I can totally see where this could have easily worked, but it wasn't really relevant to the story that Homer was trying to tell. But if you wanted to include a female voice, that would be hilarious to bump that in there, and her little snarky remarks. And then you have Elektra that is really looking at the impact that both the gods have and the war is having on these women. Natalie Haynes does go into it as well, but it's a lot of different perspectives, so it's not as clear of a picture or a narrative flow, whereas Elektra definitely has a little bit more flow to it because you're only following 3 perspectives rather than, like, I think there was 8 different perspectives in 1,000 Ships. So looking back, it's like, yeah, cool, I understand where these points are at, and when they're talking about key moments in the Iliad, I'm now like, oh yeah, cool, I've got that. But I think for me personally, I just enjoy retellings as a base, whether that be Greek and Norse fairy tale retellings, because it does something different. It takes a story that's well known and well loved, and you can just experience something different from it. I don't necessarily need to know the original to appreciate it doing something fun and doing something different and giving other voices a step up to be able to actually be heard. So this reading experiment has definitely pushed my brain. I didn't really think about the consequences of reading retellings and a source material like back to back to back, and I know it has been stretched over a little while because we took a break in March, and I think we're taking a break in, well, Mel's going to continue reading the Iliad in May, and then it's going to be June and July for Pat Barker's. Reading even 1,000 Ships and then Elektra within a month was a lot for my brain, and then on top of that, I dug my heels in with the Iliad. Like, I filmed a clip saying I wasn't doing this, I was tapping out, I couldn't do it, because I started listening to it and I was just like, for the love of God, I've been through this already. So I definitely think that you can burn out on these sorts of things, and when you're approaching it from a really different mindset than I'm used to, it was interesting to put myself in that position. But I'm very keen. I do love Silence of the Girls, and I'm so keen to reread that and then continue on with The Women of Troy and just see the direction that The Women of Troy go. I might really be fucking over the story of Troy and the Trojan War by the end of July, and I think that there was discussions about doing different aspects of different mythologies, and I might say to Mel, like, I need space between. I don't know if I need to have 1 month on, 1 month off, 1 month on, or if I need like 2 or 3 months between. Or it might be fine for other stories. This one was not 100% my vibe. And I did know that. I fell asleep multiple times reading it. The first time, I fell asleep 3 times while reading it this time. 2 or 3 times. I'm also really unwell, so that was a choice. And I've read a majority of it today. So choices, you know. I set myself up for success, yes? It's funny because I'm like, I'm really enjoying doing this and stepping outside my comfort zone. But at the same time, I'm also like, that was a 3-star read. And I have no idea what I'm trying to gain from this. But, you know, it's interesting stepping outside your comfort zone, and I'm really, honestly, the thing I'm most excited for with this project is seeing Mel's video and seeing her thoughts and what she's taken from it all, and being able to look at that, because I feel like that is going to make so many different things click in my head, and I'm just excited for it. And I'm excited that she's excited and really just going hell for leather with it. I'm excited to have been able to do this with her. I'm just realizing aspects of my own reading at the same time, since I've never done something like this before. I don't know how the fuck your booktubers do vlogs that are reading like sci-fi for a week, or reading the same series, multiple books of it in a singular week. Like, I did that with the Blue Bloods and nearly drove myself bloody insane. So I'm like, my brain does not do the samesies. Samesies is not okay. Learning things about myself and my reading tastes and preferences and all that good fun stuff. I ended up lowering my rating from a 4-star to 3-star. If I was being honest with myself when I rated it in 2021, it would have been a 3-star originally. And I feel like it is a great classic for people that enjoy learning about history and learning all these different aspects, and being able to see interactions with gods and things like that, and the minor supernatural elements that are also like psychological breaks with Achilles, which I find fascinating. So whenever I was talking to a horse or to a ghost, I was fascinated because I like that shit. But it's just not my kind of story. I'm not a historian. I don't really give a shit about ancient texts, and I just find it very hard to engage with it and enjoy it to a higher level, because I am looking at it in a slightly more critical perspective this read through as well. I wasn't just trying to let it wash over me. I did let it just wash over me in certain sections. I also read along with the Cliff Notes version on the Libby app once I finished each book, and I feel like that was good in cementing like what actually happened, because I do struggle with presentation of language as well, because my brain is a basic ass bitch. It needs simple words. Very rambly clip, I'm sorry, but that's what I have when I have 0 functionality. So, love that. Do I have anything else floating in my brain?
I'm surprised you had anything floating in that brain.
Me too. Okay, with that, I'll chat with you when I'm fucking reading the next one. Bye. Hello! So, for you it's been a short time. For me it's been 2 months? Feels like a lot longer. Anyway, I have just drawn The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker for Stephanie from Stephanie's Book Versus 48-hour TBR Star Hop for the 10th of June, I think is where we're at. I'm going to dive into this. The audiobook is 11 hours long, so that's 4 hours of straight listening to get through this, and I am hoping to get it done today because I need to continue on with this game and try and finish it in this 48 hours. So yeah, we'll see how we go, but I am definitely speeding through this. It is a reread for me, so I'm excited just to fall back into the world. And I think I'll do what I have done previously and update at each 25% way. So I will chat with you when I'm there. So I'm now up to chapter 12. Yes, so page 82, 26% of the way through. And I love Pat Barker's writing. So for this, I do know a lot of people comment on the fact that Briseis talks so much about Achilles, but like this is your captor. I understand that you would talk about him as you're trying to process your grief. So we've had City's Fallen and she's taken as war prize, and just getting to hear their perspective and like how they're viewing the war and how they're viewing the Greeks. It's really interesting in the conversation that's had towards the opposing sides. So like we've got Briseis who's like, fuck these bitches, I'm gonna do what I can and be raped every night but hold true to myself, and I'm gonna band with these other ladies and just feel nothing but something. And then Agamemnon being a douche canoe and not giving back Chrysalis to her father who's a priest of Apollo, and then the consequences of that. It's like drawing the parallels from the Iliad and the reasoning why, but also adding some form of empowerment to the women, because Briseis is chanting the priestess chants that they said anytime she can. And I knew going in this was probably going to be one of the better reimaginings of the Iliad, because it is discussing and providing more power to women than in the original, and with the other retellings there was too many voices. And then in the case with Elektra there was less voices, so it was more of a flow, but it didn't really hit the same notes of giving women back their power because they didn't have any. So in terms of historical accuracy, who knows? But I feel like if you're wanting to hear a woman's voice and the things that they try to do to hold on to some form of self, some form of power, some form of anything, Silence of the Girls is the way to go. I'm curious to see what Mel thinks of it. I need to message her and just let her know that that's where I'm up to. And yeah, I have also been listening to the audiobook and doing the Zen coloring, and it's going really well. Yeah, I'm actually really tired. I think that's because I'm not at work or having to do stuff, and because I got up so early. I'm just like, oh. So I will check in with you at the 50%. I am now up to chapter 22, which is halfway through and 159 pages in, and oh my god. I do find it interesting that it's telling their story, meant to be retelling it, but then there's a male narrator in this, which I just feel like it's a choice that I wouldn't necessarily use myself. I wouldn't notice it in this because the chapters are not titled. When it switches to part 2, it then goes into a more masculine frame. It's like Patroclus is telling this section, but it flip-flops in the audiobook, and it's an interesting choice, because I think when I originally read it, I read it physically and just assumed that it was Briseis just finding out this information and telling us the history, not another perspective. So I find it interesting that that's the case, but at the same time this also doesn't claim to be. It literally just says, but what of the women in this story silenced by their fate? Summons the voices of Briseis and her fellow women to tell this mythic story anew, foregrounding their experiences against the backdrop of savage battle between men. So yeah, I don't think originally it was intended to have a masculine voice, so that's just an interesting choice with the audiobook, but I don't mind. It's just okay. And when it switches between the two, I'm like, okay, we're in the dude land now. I'm still really loving this. I really appreciate what these women would have to be going through and the way that their story is told, and just seeing their different positions and responses. It's all just very interesting, and I find this so much more enjoyable because it is the story of two dudes bickering over a woman, but it's so much more interesting than the Iliad for me. Funny that. I don't have too much else to comment on in this regard, just because I feel as we get through, it's just solidifying the things that are happening. I feel like it goes a lot quicker than the Iliad. I definitely condenses it a lot, so it is just getting to know their story more. I think I needed the break between reading the Iliad and this though, just to give it that little bit of distance so I wasn't reading the same thing straight after one another. And then having key features that I now remember since reading the Iliad and seeing how they play out from a woman's perspective is very interesting to me. I'm really enjoying that. And currently we're at the point where Achilles is refusing to fight because Agamemnon won't say sorry for taking your war prize. It's gonna be interesting. Obviously there's Apollo's plague in this, but there's less gods involved than the Iliad. I don't feel like the agency is there, whereas in the Iliad it was very much the power dynamics of the gods, whereas this is, we've had Apollo mentioned, Agamemnon shaping their statue in the image of himself and Zeus, but aside from that it's not really a focus. So that's an interesting separation from the original, not having those voices, and it is just purely the women's voices. They're not talking because it's just their voices. There isn't any interference or thinking about, hey, how would this happen or how would that happen? So I am just enjoying this, and it's a nice easy read. To provide some context, I have been reading Choice Words, which is a collection of essays and such like things on abortion, so to have a break and read this for this readathon has been so much more pleasurable to my brain. So I will check in at the 75%. So I'm now 75% of the way through, so I'm there. I do find it interesting how much of the male narrator we get in this. I know that the descent of Achilles is best told from the male perspective, I suppose, but I find it interesting that the women aren't as vocal in this section. We do have their voices, but not as much, and we see the concern about what is going to happen to them be there and prevalent, because Achilles is a complete unknown at the moment. So I'm curious as to how this concludes with Briseis' story. And yeah, I do think it's interesting when this is the silence of the girls that they chose to have a male narrator for Achilles' main focus. But you know, it's a choice. I'm still absolutely loving this, and I find it so much more enjoyable than the actual Iliad. It's much more my type of war story. It's just very easy to listen to. I can relate to, well, I can't relate to their experiences, but I can relate to being a woman and feeling that concern of power because you are a woman in a male-dominant society. It's so interesting to have read the Iliad so closely and now having these parallels. The descent of Achilles is very much on par for what was in the Iliad, and how we get a sprinkling, I suppose, of the women's voices at the time of it occurring. What's going to happen to us? I'm scared of Achilles, that his anger's gonna just burst out. He can't have sex with me because he's in grief and his dick won't work, and I'll try to do a couple of things, but yeah. It breaks me as well because I feel like the love of Achilles and Patroclus I wanted to have existed. I wanted their little love bond, and even if it was just a strong platonic friendship, I feel like Achilles' grief in this is not more understandable, but it's definitely more palatable. He's not just a raging lunatic, he's lost in grief and knowing he's about to die as well. So very interesting on that forefront. I will read the last little bit and let you know how I get along with it. I'm gonna go update the other vlog, which will have been out months before you're seeing this, which is a really weird concept, and then I'll probably get distracted or try and keep going. Hello, so I have finished Silence of the Girls by Pat Parker, and once again giving this 4 stars. I really adore seeing Briseis' story and just the way that they go about telling the Iliad and the events that happen. So much more than the actual Iliad. Also, if you can hear anything in the background, that's just Ash playing Diablo 4. All my points that I've been saying throughout this resonate true. It was definitely a much more enjoyable read considering the content matter, and just the perspectives that we get are just so much more personable. I'm frustrated at the situation, but I'm not frustrated with the characters, whereas the Iliad, I'm like, just grow the fuck up, you stupid dumb fucks. Whereas for this, it's like, hey, yeah, you're a woman who's in this horrible situation. I respect the decisions that you make. I also was thinking that the ending of this was the ending of Song of Achilles. And so when I got to the ending, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. So I took a moment for that to process for the ending. But I'm really happy that I read this, and I feel like if you want the Iliad in a different way, this would be the perfect thing to go for. I don't want to say it's a feminist retelling because it's not necessarily. It's just from the voices of women, which I find to be empowering. But I can also understand that there is a male voice present in this, made that more clearly by the audiobook, but it shouldn't be, because in this there is no differentiation. It's just telling their backstory. So there is still a male focus, but that is also the Iliad, so it makes sense to me. Overall, had a really fun time with this and very happy to have reread this for this project. So with that, I'm gonna go, and I'll see you next month with The Women of Troy. Hello my loves, so it is now the 31st of July, and today I have read 51% of The Women of Troy. I was going to do an initial check-in, but then that didn't work out, as it was just very noisy and I just wanted to start reading, so I did. And then I was going to do a 25% and I just fell down a rabbit hole of colouring while listening. So we're now at the 50% mark and I'm checking in. So initially I was very excited to dive into this. I didn't really know where this narrative was going and whom we were going to be focusing on. I was assuming it was going to be the end of the Trojan War, all of that shenanigans with the Trojan horse. And yeah, that's where we're going. We've continued on past that, and it's very interesting. I'm not as engaged as I was with the first one. There is a lot more, not male-centric focus, but when it was Achilles and Patroclus, they were the two main figures. But now, because it's everyone else, there are so many more voices in that the women are talking about, which is great that it's still the women's voice, but it's just, oh, this man felt that and this man felt that, and I'm like, I don't give a shit what they thought. I want to know what you think. Still, overall, really enjoying it and finding it very valuable to listen to. So we're at a point where shit's going down. It's about to go down. I don't know this narrative at all, really. I'm not familiar with the after of the Trojan War, aside from Odysseus getting sidetracked trying to get home. So I'm very not familiar with the story that's currently unfolding and where it's gonna go, but I still really love Briseis as a protagonist. She is a very strong character, and it's just so interesting seeing her dynamics in the way that she interacts with different people depending on what her goals are, and her attitude and beliefs when there's such a conflict between the two, because she's Trojan but she's got a Greek baby. Not that that was intended per se, not that she wanted that, but it is the way. And you know, she could have taken meds to not keep the baby, but she didn't. She's keeping the baby. So it's very interesting seeing how the Trojans react to her and her position of privilege and power now, as well as the shifting dynamics between the Greeks towards her as well, and their consideration of her, and then the dynamic between her and her now husband. So it's all very interesting and it's very easy to read. I am stopping now because it's 11:18 and I essentially have 2 hours. I knew that it was going to be 4 hours of listening time and I just couldn't get myself to listen to it any earlier tonight, so my bad. I'll be taking this over tomorrow, but I should be able to finish it tomorrow, which will be excellent. I'm gonna try and get up a little bit earlier, so I might go take my medication now. And I've been back on my bullshit with the colouring app. I took a break for it for a second there while I was doing my jigsaw puzzle, but now I'm back to that. I will check in with you. I probably will just check in after the completion. I probably won't do a 75% check-in unless something crucial happens. So talk to you then. Hello my loves, so it is now 10:30 on the 1st of August and I have finished The Women of Troy by Pat Barker and I'm giving this 4 stars. I didn't enjoy it as much as The Silence of the Girls as it took a more masculine focus. Not that the first one wasn't masculine focus, but this one just had more of an emphasis on really just shitty males and not as strong of the women's focus. It is predominantly the women, but it just wasn't as much as the first one. I feel that Pat really encapsulates what it would have been like for a woman of this time, and especially being a Trojan slave. And then on top of that, like the different dynamics that they have and the different power imbalances were just really fascinating to read. I thought that the progression of time was going to go a lot further than it actually did, but we leave at a place where I'm very curious for the Odyssey one to come out so we can continue on with Briseis' story. I found that this was more just a historical focus rather than a feminist vocalization, whereas the first one really had that sort of empowering sort of stance. Both work very well for one another, just a different sort of vibe. I'm also not in the best mental reading space, so I knew that I wasn't going to approach this with the most constructive mind. My brain is fried today, so I knew that finishing it off today was not going to result in articulate thoughts, so my apologies for that. I still find that it is one of the stronger retellings for me, just in the way that it goes about it and being able to tell it in a way that feels authentic. So this is actually wrapping up the retellings. So we had 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes, which I gave 4 stars. Elektra by Jennifer Saint that I gave 4 stars. Then the original text of the Iliad, which I gave 3 stars. And then for The Silence of the Girls I gave it a 4.5, and then for The Women of Troy I gave 4 stars. So I definitely preferred the retellings over the original text. I think that each of them offered a different take on approaching retellings. The common factors obviously were that they all were retelling aspects of the Iliad in very different ways. 1,000 Ships got a bit cluttered with the amount of perspectives it had. Elektra was just a very like a solid general 3-person perspective, so it felt like it flowed well. Silence of the Girls is Briseis and her talking through everything, and same with The Women of Troy. So out of all of that, I feel like if we usually focus on a singular protagonist that is not necessarily well known, but a strong person, or made to be a strong person, then my engagement is a lot more. I knew going into this that The Silence of the Girls I absolutely adored, and I didn't think that any of the other retellings would hit as close, and that is definitely true. For me, I'm sort of feeling that my order is The Silence of the Girls, The Women of Troy, 1,000 Ships, and Elektra because of the way that they approach it and the resonation it had with me. For me, I don't know why, I have this like mental thing of Elektra felt flat, but then 1,000 Ships felt very jumpy because it was so many different perspectives. So it's just interesting being able to look at these and see the difference in what they choose to focus on. Silence of the Girls definitely is more on the day-to-day side of things, whereas we're getting a lot of different actions and thoughts from a lot of different characters in 1,000 Ships, and Elektra is more their narrative and their progression rather than the day-to-day activities. So again, I think I just prefer getting to know the time rather than following through these people. So I think Mel Max and I are going to have a discussion eventually. I'm not sure what the actual plans are for that, and just have a chat over what we've read and what we've thought. I'm definitely going to need to go over these clips to refresh my brain, considering we read 1,000 Ships and Elektra back in January and February. So I'm excited to have that conversation with them and hopefully be able to come on and go into a bit more detail. I know as this vlog's gone on, my brain has not. So I'm curious to see how this does all shape up, but I'm gonna leave this one here and check in with you once a conversation has been had. Hello, just me jumping on prior to the live to just say my expression throughout this live is very and then I fiddle-faddle with a couple of things. I just want to preface that I was not bored. That is my thinking face, and I was trying so hard to use the remaining brain cells I have up here to follow along. I was taking notes and all of that sort of aspect, so please don't think that I was not engaged. I was just trying to actively listen to Max and Mel, and because of that I did zero control on this. So just want to preface that. Also, this is 40 minutes worth of the live show, and I've just left in the things that I thought were interesting or just tidbits that were something that I hadn't touched on and or just entertaining. So I hope that it's interesting for you, but yes, it is the next 40 minutes or so of footage is this live, and I'll check in with you after that point. Hello guys! So this is the live chat discussion with the beautiful Mel from a book being named Mel and their best friend Max, who is a trained professional classicist. So I will leave links to Mel's channel down below, and please go subscribe to her. She is fantastic, wonderful, just lovely human being. Max is not on YouTube, but that is a-okay because we still love them regardless, and they are presenting their knowledge to us in this little chat, and I'm so excited to be able to just blare brain and have two smart people talk while I just sit here and go zero thoughts in the brain, because brain does not brain. And hopefully looking back on some of the vlog footage, I can clarify some points and just discuss some stuff. Mel sent through some questions earlier for Max to think on, and as we know, I am always zero thoughts, zero brain cells, so this is going to be a fun time. And yeah, so I'm very excited to chat about the books that we've been reading and be able to sum up this little project of ours.
So I guess maybe we go around the circle. We can all say kind of what our general feelings are now that we've finished our project. I can start if we want.
Sure.
I am feeling a little bit tired. I had a bit of a busy weekend, so excuse me if I'm not braining very well. But I really enjoyed this reading vlog experience. Had a good time with it. Just thought it was really interesting. I didn't love all of the books that we read, but I enjoyed reading them anyway. I enjoyed getting the different perspectives on it, and I definitely enjoyed having the chats that we were having because it put like a different perspective on things as I was reading them and clarified a few things as I was reading them and helped me kind of think through a bit more of the purpose of the books, because I feel like all of the books that we read were written with a purpose in mind, and I think that most of them were to somewhat try and put a bit of a feminist lens on the Trojan War and on the Iliad in particular. So it helped, I think, to have those chats as we were going. I mean, obviously, like, people read things for all sorts of reasons, and the pure proliferation of books about the Trojan War, retellings, and of the Iliad kind of shows that, like, they're obviously really popular at the moment, and I'm sure a lot of people are reading them just because they're popular and just for entertainment, which is absolutely obviously fine. But why through fiction? Why not through, I mean, I'm sure there's been many, obviously there's been many like scholarly books, academic research papers and journal articles and all things discussing these very topics, but why fiction for general consumption as opposed to professional classicists such as yourself? That's just what I was thinking
about, like what professional classicists have been doing and what the fiction writers have been doing and how they might link up and influence each other, because I don't think it's either or, I think it's both. And sometimes it's people who are trained who are then also writing novels.
Yeah. Well, Natalie Haynes has written some non-fiction, obviously, as well as fiction. And I assume that she had some training.
Yeah, definitely. And Madeleine Miller is another one. And Emily Hauser, she's another person who's working as a classicist and also writing Trojan War novels. So I definitely feel like I did not do the project kind of as intensively as you guys did, and it hasn't been a kind of year thing for me. So it's been really, really cool to be part of and to witness you guys doing it. And it's been cool to read a few of the extra books or reread things that I hadn't dipped into. But I've been like teaching around these topics and researching a little bit around them, around women's writing and rewriting of contemporary myth probably now for about 8 or 9 years. And I had a student who did a project very much on like feminist retellings of the Trojan War 2 or 3 years ago, an honours project. And I already have plans for how I'm going to tackle this next in the next course I do on my gender and sexuality and antiquity course. So I feel kind of almost envious of you guys that you've done it really intensively and thoroughly, because there's a few books that you guys mentioned that I'm like, no, I did not get around to reading that one. But it's been really cool to hear you guys or see you guys through the chat that we've had, like bouncing ideas off each other and asking me questions, because it's definitely got me to think about things just more from the perspective of a general fiction reader and less from the perspective of if I had to teach this, how would I teach it, which has been really cool. Yeah. What I am hoping to do is in a couple of years I will probably be allowed to or be able to teach our epic course, which I haven't done before. So I've incorporated epic into other things, and I've incorporated gender and sexuality material into other courses, but this will be the first time that I'll actually have like the epic course. And I think what I'm going to do is kind of have pairings, like when you go to a fancy restaurant, not that I go to fancy restaurants, but you know how they have like the wine or the beer that they recommend you have with each course. So I kind of want to do that, where I have like, here's a chunk of the Iliad and here's a modern feminist version like the next week, and sort of do like paired kind of tastings of the Iliad. So that's my idea, and the Odyssey and the Aeneid. So that's my idea at the moment.
Definitely sounds more palatable.
Yes. Yeah. If I can get Madeline Miller in there, I think her Circe book, I know a lot of my students, like hundreds of my students, say to me that that's been a big influence on them. So if I can get that in there, I think it's really cool.
Yeah. I had a lot of fun with this. I did find that I learned something very valuable about myself, and that is I cannot read the same topic of something multiple months in a row because looking back over my vlog footage for Elektra, it was only the second month, but I was already in the state of, I've already read this. Like, even though it's different and the way that they're presenting it's completely different, it was like, I've heard this story already. And then trying to face the Iliad, which I've already struggled with to read previously because I don't come at it from an academic perspective. I am looking purely at my reading from an enjoyment perspective. Yeah. It's hard. So it was like, okay, so it took a lot of effort for me to get into the groove with it, but I've found it really valuable in actually learning to articulate my thoughts better and picking up like key things that normally I just brush over. Like for me, I think one thing that we have discussed a lot, but it's still sort of floating around in my brain, is what is actually constituted as a feminist retelling, and is it actually the goal of the author, or is it pitched by publishers because they know that it sells? Because for me, it was especially really prevalent in 1,000 Ships. It wasn't claiming to be a feminist retelling on the cover. There is nowhere that it said it. It was, we are retelling this from the perspective of the women.
Yep.
But it didn't say it was doing it from a feminist perspective. So it's like, and then I had that sitting throughout all the different things, and not really having many brain cells to work with the Iliad was very difficult to then pull out like the feminist side of things and sort of look at it in that perspective. But because we had that chat and when I was vlogging my thoughts and trying to spit it out as best as humanly possible, it actually helped in being able to just understand it better. Not well, but better. And then Pat Barker, I loved their writing. And so for me, it was very easy to just fall into their writing again. And I'm also a speed reader. I don't take time to sit with books. Like for most of these, I was reading them within 2 days. And when you're doing something like this, that was not a great choice on my part, because I should take my time to sit with it and be able to enjoy it. And the one that I did, which was 1,000 Ships, that took me 5 days, where the rest of it was either a day or 2 days. I remember it that much better. And it felt the most impactful, even though it was mid-tier. So it was just interesting. And I'm glad that we've done it, because it really got me to sort of branch out and try something new and do something different. But I think the way that I am as a reader, if we continue on and do a different reiteration of this, I need to just set aside a week and just sit with it nice and slow.
Yeah.
Because that way it's going to be a better overall result in terms of my enjoyment, my understanding, and the overall content, because I will actually be able to think through things better.
That makes so much sense. And I think it's really cool that like this has ended up being a learning experience about how you learn. Sorry,
Yeah.
take questions. Yeah. What you said about the like struggling a little bit with the Iliad reminded me of part of our chat a while ago where we were talking about like, well, what different translations would I recommend or what different versions? And you guys were talking about audiobooks and stuff. And that was really interesting and useful for me because it just kind of reminded me, like I teach Iliad to first year students in a myth course, and I try and break it down and make it accessible. But it was just a really, really good reminder that there's the story, which has all these awesome elements, which are so appealing to so many different people. And then there's the way that the story is composed by Homer, which has all of these artifacts of ancient Greek poetic composition, like catalogs and these really crazy similes. And it has all these inconsistencies because it was passed down in the oral tradition. So there are things where you're like, what? Does this make sense? And all of that sort of stuff I'm quite used to. And I sort of forget that actually, so I think of that as being part of how and why the Iliad is such a great story. But actually, for a lot of people, I think they can be really attracted to the story, but the actual way that it's told by Homer, they don't connect with. And that was, you know, fair enough. It's poetry that comes from a completely different time and place. And it's not necessarily what a lot of us want to read for enjoyment anymore.
Well, I feel like I need to apologize to Paige for making you read the Iliad. Because you were kind of like, I've read it before, and I was like, no, I think you need to reread it. So of course I also reread it, and it took me ages because I did it via audio, which I know it's weird. Most people who talk about doing things via audio talk about how I read it over audio because it took me less time, and I'm like, no, it takes me longer to do audiobooks. But I did finally do it, and it was good. I'm glad I'd listened to it audibly. But yeah, I think that I had probably not obviously the same way you have, Max, because I don't teach it, but I had done a similar thing because when I read it as part of a course that we then like studied it and analyzed it.
I don't think anyone should ever apologize for making anyone else read the Iliad. Like, just putting it out there.
I listened to the Dan Stevens narration, and that was the only thing that got me through.
It's really cool that you guys did the audio versions because I had read the Iliad and taught it a lot of times before I saw any kind of performed version. So there's a one-man play called An Iliad, which was written by a couple of creators in the US, I think about 2 decades now ago, as like an anti-war play. And it's been performed in Auckland, in New Zealand, where I live, and kind of taken over by the director, Michael Hurst, and this like great New Zealand version of it. And that has whole slabs of the Iliad that he brings to life. And it really makes such a difference. And I know the audiobook experience would be a bit different again, but it's so much closer to being what people actually would have experienced in the original, context.
Well, that's why I wanted to listen to it audibly, because I realized that when I read it, I read it with the aid of Marguerite and Terry, our old classics lecturers, because I studied it. I think I remember some the good bits, the like bits of story, and I'd forgotten just how much shining helmet there was.
Oh my god, the arming scenes, right? Like, and then he put on his leg greaves and he fastened the leg greaves around his enormous calves, and then he put on the other leg greaves, and then he put on his armor, and then amazing. And then you read that like 10 times in a row. And also how violent it is as well. Like that was something that came across to me when I saw the performed version, because he's actually kind of acting the stuff out, but in like a one-man way. And you just go, oh my God, this is so gory and so disgusting, like eyeballs coming out on the ends of spears, and like the spear goes in and then the twist and the entrails come out, and just like there's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines where it's just that, and you're like, oh, I don't really remember this from class.
So it feels like something that you should think of as being kind of highbrow, kind of like Shakespeare, in the sense that people see Shakespeare these days as like, that's what you do when you do like A levels English or whatever. I forget about that part of it, that it is gory.
Homer didn't write anything down. The versions that we have of the Iliad and the Odyssey that are written down come from about 400 or 500 years after we think Homer was composing, if Homer was a single person rather than a group of people composing at different times. yeah, the general consensus at the moment is that it's about a 400 to 500 year lag between any period of composition. And the fact that it was orally composed explains some of the really kind of weird things about it. So you know how there's heaps of sections where the text just kind of repeats on itself?
Yeah.
So you have like one, like Zeus says, oh, go down and deliver this speech. And then he gives the whole speech. And then the messenger goes down and then gives the entire speech. And then someone gives it to somebody else. So that's a real hallmark of oral composition because it is like a memory aid. And all the repeated lines and half lines, like thus spoke Achilles of the swift-footed heel, all that sort of stuff. So there are all these kind of hallmarks of oral composition that you don't find in later Greek and Roman epics when they are just actually writing them. But then there's this question of, is Homer one person who's creating this particular story? Is it a whole group of people at different times creating different bits of it? But the fact that it wasn't compiled until hundreds of years later probably explains some of the inconsistencies, like the war's been going on for 10 years, but there's this bit in book 3 where King Priam's like, Helen, tell me who all these men are down here on the plains, as though the war's just started. So there's a few things like that kind of seem like plot holes or story inconsistencies. And that's entirely possibly because of that, because it would never have been performed all at once. It would have been like, you know, a couple of hours here, a couple of hours there, but people we don't think are in general performing the entirety of the Iliad or the Odyssey. So it doesn't need to be consistent in the way that we think of like a book has to be consistent. Every version of the book has to be the same because they have to match. There are some sources from, I think, the 400s BC where people quote Homer, but we don't have those bits of Homer. I actually really love the idea of audience participation. I don't think there's any explicit evidence for that, but part of my theory about some of these texts that are transmitted orally is that probably the bards, as they're going to different places, might present the story in a particular way or name check certain things in a way that corresponds to the audience. So if you're giving the catalogue of ships of all the different people who came to Troy, and if you're doing it in a place where a bunch of people were sent as fighters, maybe you beef that bit up a little bit, or maybe you name check a few particular heroes. I think probably that stuff happened. The ancient Greece in the Mycenaean era seems to have worked that there were lots of people who spoke similar enough languages, some version of Greek, that they could communicate and they could trade. There's lots of trading going on. But you've basically got these small palace kind of civilizations which are relatively localized. And so the story of the Trojan War is not a pan-Greek story of all Greeks think and feel the same and they all go off and fight Troy. It's a story of a kind of collective of like a union, almost like something like the United States of America or something like that, where actually there's really diverse local cultures, there's diverse ways of speaking and thinking. And even though there's some shared religious framework, there are different, like the gods operate a little bit differently in different places. That level of variety in ancient Greece still exists in the age of Athens. Like Athens in the 5th century with its radical democracy is really different from the way Corinth is operating, which is really different from the way Sparta's operating a little bit further down south, which is different from what you find on an island. So actually, I think that the diversity of the different kinds of warriors who go to fight the Trojans actually kind of works to keep the myth alive, because Greeks don't develop like a pan-Greek identity really for a long time. The way that warfare works in Iliad and Odyssey is really different from what people say in Athens or Sparta or anything would have been familiar with, like reasonably different. Some of the technologies have changed, you know, so some of the technologies that we find in the Iliad people wouldn't have been using so much. They're not a Bronze Age civilization anymore. I was just thinking, Mel, what you were saying with Shakespeare, I don't know if people are still teaching like this, but oh my God, over 20 years ago when I was learning Shakespeare in English classes, it was very much like, the tragedies are plays about particular times and places, but they're actually about universal emotions and universal mistakes. So here, learn this tragedy about a king from the 1100s and see how it relates to your life. Welcome to Macbeth. And I feel like there's a lot of similarity, you know, like we have evidence that people in the ancient Greek world thought about their moral dilemmas in terms of like, and then Odysseus dishonors Ajax, and then a goddess, you know, sends like a cloud of madness to make Ajax mad, and then he kills himself. How does this relate to your life? You know, like they kind of do actually think in those terms.
Same kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Paige, I'm sorry, Mel and I have just been ranting.
I was about
No,
to say
it's
that.
okay because it's good. I'm like, okay, this actually like helps. But I have no further thoughts to add. I just it's helping brain to be like, oh, because I'm also geographically challenged. So when you're saying places, I'm like, they are a thing on a piece of earth.
You know how you were talking about fiction versus scholarship thing, Mel?
Mm.
So there has been heaps of attention in the last, let's say, 40 years, heaps of attention by feminist classicist scholars onto these texts from the perspective of, well, what were women doing? Can they tell us anything about what women were doing? Do we know how women in the audience responded? You know, are these completely
Were there
male
even
constructions?
women in the audience?
Were there even women? Were there even women? When were women? You know, all those sorts of things. And so there's so much great scholarship. And like, I mean, just for one example, there's a woman called Ruby Blondell who's written heaps and heaps on Helen of Troy and how Helen was used by lots of different ancient Greek authors at different times as archetypes of different things. Like there's heaps of great scholarship. But when you're asking kind of why fiction and why do like novelists keep referring to this stuff, I think maybe, for example, why do they return to this stuff more than historical exemplar? They could be doing historical fiction about Aspasia or Artemisia or any of those kind of big name ancient Greek women. And they tend not to. I don't think that's being done. And I think that people come back to the myths again and again because there is that flexibility inherent in the genre of a myth. They're not historically falsifiable.
Mm.
And I think that makes them really valuable for storytellers.
That makes
because
sense.
you can very quickly disprove if someone wants to write a historical novel about what Aspasia was doing in 442 BC. You can very quickly disprove that.
Mm-hmm.
So then it's like, well, I guess you're doing alternative fiction, like alternative history or something.
Yeah, but they're often, at least here in Tasmania, often shelved with the fantasy. So I guess, like, to a certain extent, they can be seen as fantasy retelling, even though none of the ones we've actually done were fantasy retellings, despite the fact that to many people, like, Zeus was a real person or real god. Yeah.
I think you're right about the like false equivalence of myth equals fiction, but also myth equals fantasy. Just thinking about, I think it's in The Silence of the Girls, the Pat Barker one, where Thetis is really clearly a character and is a goddess and is an ocean goddess. And so when Achilles is out swimming, he's like communing with her. From a Greek perspective, that's not fantastical. It's not supernatural.
Yeah.
It's not even, mythos wouldn't be a useful term. A mythos, which is where we get our word myth in ancient Greek, just means like a speech act, like something that you say or that you speak.
He's talking to his mum. He just happens to be a goddess. So I go to Kingston to see mum and dad. Like,
yeah, exactly.
he goes to the sea to see mum.
Yeah, and in like in Metal and Miller's The Song of Achilles, when Thetis has even more of a presence, and the centaur is in that one, right? And they are like hanging out with the centaur again. That wouldn't be seen as supernatural, and it wouldn't be seen as fantastical. That's just part of the like cosmological and theological framework. But if as a publisher you're coming at things with a kind of assumed perspective that any of those gods are not real, then you're not thinking of it as theological, you're thinking of it as something
story,
pure.
as fantastical.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All the fantasy that has Western fantasy will have at least one Greek mythological creature in it. So, yeah.
I'm just pulling up Goodreads because I was looking through my spreadsheet and I realized that I had tagged 1,000 Ships as historical, Elektra is fantasy, the Iliad is classic, and then Silence of the Girls as, where'd it go? Fantasy, but the Women of Troy as historical. And I don't know how I missed that earlier, that I didn't have continuity. And so now I'm just quickly pulling up Goodreads and each of the books. So 1,000 Ships is genre is mythology and historical fiction. Elektra is mythology fantasy. The Women of Troy is mythology historical fiction. And The Silence of the Girls is historical fiction. So I just fucked up with that one. but Elektra is considered more fantasy, whereas the other three are historical.
That's interesting.
I wonder, why is the Elektra considered more fantasy?
Maybe because it does have more of a focus on Cassandra and their relationship with Apollo. So for that, it's like obviously not fantastical, but in Western publishing lens, fantastical elements.
Yeah.
Well, it's just her story, whereas the others don't. She's woven in, but there's nothing really that stands out to me as a fantastical relationship or dynamic in that capacity to the same that Elektra really did focus on her. So maybe, but
it's interesting.
it could just because they just viewed it under the fantasy lens with Ariadne, I think.
The Ariadne one makes more sense to me being fantasy because, like, you know, you've got the Minotaur and the threads, like magic is involved.
So it was shortlisted for Waterstone's Book of the Year and finalist for Goodreads Choice Fantasy category.
Yeah, I was
Which one
going to
was that?
say, I'm pretty sure I saw Ariadne was in a fantasy Goodreads choice, and I was a bit like, really?
Played up the supposedly magical element, right? I think
Yeah.
Cersei did that. Madeline Miller's Cersei did that.
Yeah. Yeah, Madeline Miller. I mean, that comes back to what we were saying before about marketing versus like the intention of the author versus the marketing. I feel like Madeline Miller, if she is a classicist, if that's, you know, if she's also researching on an academic level, then maybe if she were doing that marketing, maybe she would have not put fantasy first, but
Because same for Song of Achilles. Its highest is fantasy, historical, and then romance. But this is just off Goodreads. Like this is
Goodreads, so that's not the B and that's not really the be all and end all of publishing anyway. It's a good
feel like it's
of where people who read it are viewing things.
I suppose while they're describing that, what was your overall rating for everything?
Yeah, so Jennifer Saint's book, I'm sure you would not be surprised at all, is probably my highest. Jennifer Saint, I gave Elektra 5 stars. I gave The Silence of the Girls 5 stars as well. And I gave Women of Troy 4. And then I don't remember what I gave the Iliad. Because I could go into call pile. That would.
I'm sorry. You're talking about giving the Iliad a star rating?
Yeah.
Okay. 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 What kind of world is this?
Give it a 3. But I think that was mostly from the perspective. I think that was mostly from the perspective of like the story rather than the telling.
I think you just broke Max.
Sorry, Max. I didn't mean to break you.
You didn't break me. No one breaks me by their poor judgment of the Iliad. I deal with students.
Should I have given it a higher rating?
Well, I feel like it's unrateable.
Fair enough.
Okay. You know that in general, I don't do the whole like, classics is the foundation of Western civilization, blah, 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 blah. Like I really in general don't believe in that. I'm going to pick one thing and be like, if you took this Jenga block out of like world literature, what would happen?
Yeah.
If you take the Iliad out or the Odyssey, if you take out the different ones, then different things happen. But like some pretty significant other works then completely failed to materialize.
This entire conversation wouldn't be happening for
I don't actually think you would be born.
Fair.
That was a joke.
I find it interesting, like, because for me, one of my main focuses has been the whole publishing trend of this. So, yeah, literally this project wouldn't exist. But what would we be reading instead?
Well, I don't know, but you know what you wouldn't have is the Metamorphoses. Okay. Think
fine, I haven't read that. I'm too scared.
No, but that's okay, because if you've read any Greek mythology or anything that's infected by or infused by Greek mythology, you're actually basically reading versions of Ovid's Metamorphoses, because the canonical versions of Greek mythology that we have are almost all Ovid's versions. The Trojan War stuff is actually maybe the major exception to that. But heaps of the stories, like, a huge amount of the stories that have become kind of canonical as the Greek myths, we have from Ovid's Met. And you wouldn't have the Met without, basically, if you take out the Iliad and the Odyssey, you lose the Greek epic tradition, which means that you then lose the Roman epic tradition. The Roman epic tradition began with translations of the Odyssey and then of the Iliad, and then of kind of versions of the same sorts of things. And then the great Roman national identity project of, can we do a poem that captures who we are and what we are, is a mashup. I'm being so unkind to Virgil here. I love you, Virgil. I just taught Virgil like so much this year. But you couldn't, Virgil's great, the Aeneid's great, but you literally can't have the Aeneid without the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Yeah. And without the Aeneid, you can't have Dante. And without Dante and the Aeneid, you can't have Paradise Lost.
Wow.
Like, there's, like, if you take out, this is kind of why I'm like, I mean, you rate it whatever you want, Mel. But it's like rating a mountain. Like, the mountain don't care.
Paige and I were talking about what ratings we gave for each book. And going through, which
I'm sorry. I just need to interrupt because I just had two really important thoughts. Thought number one, for the purposes of this project, if you don't have the Iliad and the Odyssey, then you lose a crap ton of Greek tragedies. So obviously a lot of Greek tragedies deal with other myth cycles, but some of the most significant Greek tragedies that were the best respected in their time, and the prize-winning ones, are absolute. They're not knockoffs of Homer, but they're responding to Homer. But then my more intense thought is that if you don't have the Iliad and the Odyssey, you never have Apollonius, who is a scholar of Homer, like one of the actual scholar nerds in the Library of Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. You never have him writing his Argonautica, things of the Argonaut, things of the Argo, which is Jason and the Golden Fleece. And without Jason and the Golden Fleece, and I'm not joking, you don't have Percy Jackson.
Oh,
yeah,
you can't get rid of it, Mel. It's stuck.
It's incredible hubris of either of us to rate the Iliad. I am in no way pretending that, I have any right to do this. However, just from those things that I read out to you, character, atmosphere, writing, just thinking about that from a purely as a reader reading this book, not thinking about all the ramifications of where it fits in our universe and how important it is, not thinking about all those things, just as a reader reading this book, like any other book.
So not thinking about the fact that if you take out Homer from the Jenga block of Western literature, the entire thing collapses. So sure, if we're not thinking about that, then you give it 3 stars.
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah,
okay.
Pretty much. If I don't think about the fact that without Homer, I wouldn't have The Lord of the Rings, which my entire childhood rests upon.
That's true. You literally wouldn't. You actually wouldn't exist as we know you, and I wouldn't either. Like, if we think about how much the stories that we read as kids, especially, or absorb as kids, whether we read them or see them or whatever, like how much they permeate us, we would be different people.
That's very, very true. So, my incredible hubris of daring to rate the Iliad aside, I was just going through my list of questions that I sent you. And one of the questions that I said, the first one I sent to you was, what is it about Briseis that modern readers seem to be so fascinated by? And then I wrote, or is that just me? To which Max responded, I think it's just you. Which
I've always been known for my tact.
Which brings us to actually back to Ovid again, because I think that
it's because you've read Heroides 3.
Fascination with Briseis is actually from Ovid. We should have put that in this project because because
that would have been great.
I actually reread it the other day and I was like, yeah, this should have been in the project. So do you want to explain what the Heroides
Sure. Ovid is a Roman poet who's writing these 10s BC and then into the turn of the millennium. And one of the earliest things that he writes are a series of poems, letters from the perspectives of heroines, which is where the Heroides comes in. It literally is just the ancient Greek word for like women who do stuff, ancient heroines. And so he takes a bunch of mythological characters. Most of them are Greek, but not all of them. And he writes letters from their perspective to the significant men in their lives. Yeah, they're all, the husbands or the boyfriends or the beloved, etc. And so think it's letter number 3 is from Briseis to Achilles. And so it's Ovid, a Roman man, taking up the perspective of a Trojan captive or captive from around the area of Troy, writing to her Greek enslaver who she's kind of fallen in love with. So it's a bit of a Stockholm syndrome letter.
And I think that is my personal fascination with Briseis. And reading this is why I'm like, we probably should have thrown this in the mix, because reading Pat Barker, who obviously centered Briseis in The Silence of the Girls and The Women of Troy, it is fairly clear that she is somewhat aware of Briseis from the Heroides.
I think I remember we had a chat ages ago about some things that Natalie Haynes said in doing some of the press, I think, for The Thousand Ships, on some of the stuff that was kind of in the blurb and the marketing materials that I had found a bit objectionable. And I didn't mind the book at all. I thought it was really interesting. But I thought that some of the way that that was presented as a kind of groundbreaking treatment of, the perspectives of these women, I thought that that was kind of over the top, because actually going back to Homer, we have Homer giving us insight into a lot of these women's perspectives. And then you have the Greek tragedians picking up on that in a huge way, particularly Euripides with his play The Trojan Women, among several others that he wrote about Trojan women, but not exclusively Euripides. Anyway, so I did think that was kind of, you can definitely say women haven't explored this, but to say these women have never been given a voice is not really true, except there are a few who really are almost entirely voiceless, but around whom the plot pivots. One of them is Lavinia in the Roman tradition of the Aeneid, and the other one is Briseis. And so, Mel, I think that it's a really good point that Briseis is not, she's not being given the voice that her position in the narrative warrants.
Women haven't been given a voice is not necessarily accurate, but to say that like a fairly important character in the structure of the story who happens to be a woman hasn't been given a voice. I mean, you could also argue that Patroclus could have been given a lot more voice as well. Like, obviously, he is a bit more of a character, but like his experiences definitely are pivotal to the novel as well, or the story as well. And he, I feel like, was probably less central to the narrative than he could have been. But another thing that I find really interesting about Briseis, and I think that I must have, because I did study Ovid as part of my honours thesis in my bachelor's degree. So that's why I'm like all about the Heroides and stuff. I think that what I found really interesting in discussing that particular letter was that what was brought up is the way that that Briseis in this letter is very much almost parroting what Telemachus says to Hector in the Iliad about Achilles being mother, father, brother, sister. Since all of her family have died, he's the most pivotal. And then Ovid kind of takes that and then puts that into Briseis's letter to Achilles, and like kind of turns the whole concept on its head, because initially I feel like potentially Homer was using it as a way to like kind of romantic, like you are like so important to me because of this, and then to hear it coming from Briseis about her captor and rapist is quite like full on. So I think that was something that always fascinated me. But also, like, Homer wrote that originally from Andromache's perspective. So to say that women didn't have a voice or didn't have a perspective in the Iliad, again, I don't think, like we said, is accurate. It just maybe isn't the one person that, like you said, none of this action would have even happened if we hadn't had her.
Yeah, I think it's really valid to look back at any of the canons of literature that have been predominantly constructed by any one set of people. So let's say in this case, constructed by men, probably exclusively free men in slaveholding societies, as far as we can tell. And to say either there's no characters of this kind of social standing who speak, or when there are those characters, well, hang on a second, they're being voiced and characterized entirely from the perspective of the people in power. I think it's totally fair enough to say that, so I think it's fair enough to say, well, hang on, we've got Euripides' version of the Trojan women. let's have some women's versions of it. I think that's totally fair enough to say. It just kind of grates on me a little bit when people sort of sometimes infer that like these women have kind of been completely ignored, because that kind of silences them even more in a way, or it can miss the sexism with which they've been treated, which is actually really important. So for example, Helen is in some texts made to take a huge amount of blame for her role in things, and she's used as an example of moral agency versus, you know, moral responsibility for hundreds of years in Greek philosophy. And so if you just say, oh, people didn't care what Helen thought, it's like, no, they did. That doesn't mean it wasn't sexist.
It's not the not listening to women. It's the what we do with who's speaking for them and what we do with what is said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go soon because it's about 10:30.
Well, I might end the recording part and then we can kind of say goodbye, because I'm sure Paige and I are going to have our own actual ending to our videos. So
yes. Hello, my darlings. So welcome to the end of this vlog experiment thing, and I just wanted to come on and wrap it all up, and I am so happy with how this went. I'm so thankful to Mel for putting this out there and to be able to do it together. I'm not sure when their video is going to go up at the time of filming this. I'm filming this on the 21st, and I'm hoping you'll see this video in a couple of hours. It's currently 3:45 and I need to go visit my granddad, so we'll see. I just wanted to come on and finalize this off because I made mention throughout this that I was going to come back and reference clips and all of that, and I did not do that. I think that this project has taught me something very crucial about myself and the way that I want to approach critical videos in the future, and that is the fact that I need to take notes. I have to slow down my reading for something like this to make it a more meaningful experience. I don't think that this vlog is bad. You just watched it, so feel free to let me know, but it is more documenting my experiences, not my thoughts, if that makes sense. And I think one of the things I would do differently going forward is have an actual pre-established question about whatever I want to focus on. So it was thrown around the idea of the feminist retellings and what makes that, what doesn't, but we didn't sit with a concrete question. We didn't sit with a why. What are we doing with this? What question are we looking for? Because I'm a speed reader, I just sort of plowed through the things and then we're like, I could pull this from here and that from there, which is fine. But if I genuinely want to do an in-depth critical analysis, I need to have a focus question. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for discussion, and it already is happening in a scholarly field, as Max said in the live, but in the public eye, I didn't do enough research for the question that I was sort of sitting with, which is what makes feminist retellings and why are they currently so popular? And what, reflecting on, I would have liked to have done, but I'm just needing to wrap this project up. So we're making notes for next time, is actually look at the publishing trends. Look at, is it the publishers that are promoting these sale pitches? Who is it that is encouraging this form of media and why it's presented the way that it is? Why is it considered fantasy in some bookshops and for some books, but for others it's in non-fiction religion, like with Stephen Fry's mythology text? Why is that? Where is the differentiation? Who is deciding these factors? And seeing if I can actually source that to answer that, and then actually, you know, reference some scholarly material, because that helps. So I think, especially if we continue to do another ancient Greek analysis, we do have Max as a resource, and I could just ask them and go, hey, are there any articles you'd recommend on this point? And I'm sure that I would find something very interesting from that. But this was my first foray into doing something a little bit different, and definitely stepping outside my comfort zone with trying to articulate my thoughts as much as humanly possible, given that I didn't change my reading style to suit. For me, this vlog has actually been an experiment for my reading rather than the books that we read. And I find that really interesting. I like that it's shifted into something I didn't know going in, because we sort of had this idea. We knew that we wanted to talk about stuff. We had our own interest in coming to this, but it's definitely been, throughout this process, me figuring out myself as a reader, more so than focusing on the Greek comparison, which is fine. I did say at the beginning that we were going to see how this goes, because not a lot of brain cells floating up there to make articulate sentences, so good fun. And overall, I know that I've always enjoyed mythology. I really love retellings of any way, shape or form. And getting to sort of draw parallels between them was an interesting exercise for me to do. It made me think about my reading differently. And through the books that we picked, they were all very different. And so drawing the parallels between them was something I actively had to think about. I do wish that I had not fallen asleep during the Iliad and taken more comprehensive notes on what I was actually looking for from the Iliad, because it's the source material. But I am proud of what I've accomplished with this, and it's really helped solidify a lot of things about myself, about my reading, and about what I like in books. The other major takeaway is the fact that I cannot read multiple reiterations of the same thing once a month. It just, no. My brain doesn't do it well. I need space between. And I ended up picking up more mythology stuff. I picked up my Katie Roberts. Like, I had a very Greek mythos year, and I'm fine with that. But it's definitely something that I noticed that hindered on my enjoyment of everything. And obviously when you're looking at something critical, the enjoyment might not always be the biggest factor, but considering myself as a reader, that is my biggest factor. And I wasn't prepared to shift that for this experiment. But I now know that about myself and can plan accordingly. So yeah, it's been really, really, really fun. And I've loved being able to chat with Mel and Max about it and have something a little bit different. So I'm so thankful to them for putting up with my chaotic energy as well, and being able to talk all things ancient Greek. Yeah, I definitely think there is more opportunity for future reiterations to have more depth. But also, what would you like to see from these sort of vlogs? Was this an entertaining, fulfilling vlog? Did it give you enough information on anything to be worthwhile? Feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to make adjustments for future projects, because it's always handy to know, and it's always interesting trying something different. And this year, in 2024, hi, I'm definitely trying to step outside my comfort zone a little bit more. So doing more projects like this year or onwards, it's always nice to know what people are actually looking for, so then I can adjust accordingly. But yeah, for future iterations, I'm definitely going to space out the books personally and have a focus question that is agreed on prior, so it's there ready to go, and we can use it as a reference point when reading to sort of draw those parallels. And then 3, do deeper research into the actual background for why the things are the way that they are. That's something I want to take forward, is looking at it that little bit deeper and actually, you know, going into the backstory behind it all. In saying that, I don't know how many reading experiments I would do in this capacity in a given year, considering that this is a hobby and I work a full-time job plus casually. So I don't want to make it this massive time chunk for me. I want to have it feel fun, and I'm not sure where my line of academic and fun mesh. That is for future iterations of this project to figure out. Basically just wanted to come on and thank Mel and Max for being the wonderful treasures that they are, and helping me actually have a better knowledge on the Iliad as a whole, ancient Greek as a whole, and being able to pick up some books that I had been sitting on purely because I was. And to ask you guys what you would like to see in future renditions of this, if you do want to see future editions at all. Please, please, please tell me if you don't want to see anything like this again. That is totally fine, full respect. If you do want to see it again, how you'd like to see it. If you're happy to keep it to the same sort of vibes with 0 brain cells up here, feel free to let me know that. If you want me to go deep diving and just like nitty gritty, properly making an essay in a video format, let me know that as well. I've just really enjoyed seeing different things about myself and about my reading, and really they've been the main takeaways from this, which is not what I expected at all. You know, it happens. This vlog, we have reached the end. I cannot believe I've been working on this for a year, but here we are. So let me know in the comments anything you want to let me know. How did you find this? Is there things you'd like me to do different? Do you want me to do it again? All of that good fun stuff. Please let me know down below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And also if you have any thoughts on the points that we've made throughout as well. If you've read these books, how did you get along with them? Were you reading them for entertainment, or did you go in wanting to see a feminist retelling, and did you get that? Let me know anything you want to let me know in the comments down below. And if you like this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more of this mess, feel free to subscribe. I'll hopefully see you in my next video. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of this. Bye!